Okay, check, check. Yes, I think we are on. Can you guys hear me? Please say something in the chat. Aye, sweet, sweet. So, there is a bit of a delay, I guess. About, I would say, 5 seconds. So, if I don't answer right away, just you know, wait a bit. I am paying attention to the chat, of course, and let's get to it. Yeah. So, let me just put on InstaMAT. Okay, so how you doing, guys? Um, so I've been working on a few materials, as you can see. I think I posted them mostly on Discord. They were meant for the Nodevember competition hosted, sort of by Nodevember and InstaMAT. InstaMAT didn't accept or it didn't require the prompts that Nodevember had, and since Nodevember was all about like your fantasy and Lord of the Rings themes, I kinda didn't feel too inspired. It's not exactly my cup of tea. So I made two materials, actually three materials, but only two that are worth talking about. The first one is fairly simple, something you know took just a few minutes really. This is the marble material that we are going to talk about first, and I also made an ice material, which is exactly the opposite. It's overly complicated. It's not polished at all. It's difficult to make. It acts out in rendering. It's your typical. That's not how you're supposed to make it. That's going to be the tutorial, if you will. Like, don't do it the way I did it. That's not a good way to make it. Anyway, I thought I'd share it anyway because, of course, there are a lot of new people coming to InstaMAT. The software is just, developing quickly, and even though I'm not a professional material creator or anything, I just want to share it, also for my own purposes, because for my own learning experience, it's very important to try to verbalize and explain how I go about stuff and maybe to analyze it again to see what could have been, perhaps done better, which is going to be the talk of the second material, definitely. Uh, anyway, let me just quickly check the chat again. So I'm not very familiar with OBS yet. Just give this is like my third stream or fourth stream actually, and it's been a while. So just give me a second. I'm going to pop the chat window somewhere. Where is it? I forget. Um, yeah, I don't know. I forget where the chat is. I'm just gonna open it in YouTube. Um, oh, can you boost volume on a mic? Yeah, definitely, definitely can. How's that? How's that, Todd? All right. Hi, Royal LJ, Royal J. I think I saw you on Discord, right? Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hope you like it. Anyway, so this first of all, the marble material. Uh, I'm just Yeah, much better. Okay, cool. Right. So, as I was saying, yes, the marble material. Um, I don't know how much you can see. It's the it's this. It looks very noisy, right? Very it's just like a lot of cracks, and that's pretty much what it is. It's just a lot of noise mixed with some flood fills and and the cracks. It's nothing too difficult, very basic, but I think it looks good. And so, what was my reference? I always like to start with a reference. It seems like the best way to go about it if you want, especially if you're looking for some sort of realism, right? So let me just show you. Um, so there is this tutorial by um, a French artist who worked on The Last of Us, for example. His name is Jonathan Benenu. Uh, Benelux, perhaps. I don't know. My French is not what it used to be. And he made this very famous scene, of course, from The Last of Us in the Capitol building, right? And as you can see, it's full of marble. It's this typical, neoclassicist, neo-Renaissance building. And we have a lot of it here in the Czech Republic, where I come from. And actually, there is my favorite library where I used to go, where I still go from time to time. I don't know if you will be able to see it. It's this neo-Renaissance library of the Academy of Sciences of the Czech Republic. And you can see it has all sorts of materials. You know, there is this material, there is this marble here, there's another marble here. The floor is made out of marble. And these little gray, you know, I don't know, panels, they are exactly that kind of material. And funnily enough, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I have been going through this library for years, and I never even noticed it. I've never noticed it. And like, I made this material, and suddenly I look, above, above my head, and there it was. So it exists. It exists. It's actually quite rare. Most of marbles you will have, especially marbles you can buy for your, I don't know, your bathroom, right? Will be white with a little bit of black, right? But this one is a bit more sort of inverted, right? And I actually like that about the material. It's very contrasty in a way. And so I thought, you know what, it's super easy to make. Let's make it. And it was like a one-day rush material. So let's get to it. Yeah, again, this is the art by John Benanu, and it's this material right here that I tried to sort of imitate. Yeah. All right, that's the reference. Nothing more really. Like, I didn't really go out of my way to collect tons of marble or anything like that, because I wanted to use a very simple technique, and that technique basically is use a lot of Voronoi patterns. Cracks organic in this case, which have a lot of different settings. As you know, Voronoi pattern is like let's just grab a simple Voronoi. Um, I mean, it's probably very basic, too basic for most people, but a Voronoi pattern is an algorithm where you scatter a lot of points around some space, in this case a 2D space, and you sort of measure the distance to the closest one. And it creates these tiles that you can then use for all sorts of purposes. It's probably one of those like most used textures in CG, right? And it's very useful for cracks. It's very useful for stones. It's very useful for yeah, like you get it, like these sort of semi-organic patterns. Crystals, for example, is also another one that you could use it for. Very simple. I'm sure if you come from Blender or any other program like that, any other software like that, they have an equivalent of Voronoi. So that's that. So I took a lot of Voronoi, and then I basically warped it. What does the warp do? Specifically, it's this directional warp. And what does it do, right? So first of all, it takes your input, and it also has an intensity input. What does that mean? Right. If you know what a slope blur node, slope blur is this. Again, a very similar node. Essentially, what a slope blur is, or rather, what a directional warp is a slope blur repeated over and over again with some blending options. In this case, you could do if you increase the number of directions in which the input gets distorted, you get this mode here, minimum, maximum, and chaining. These are your, or also average, right? These are your basic blending modes like you would have in your blend node. And you can use that to create all sorts of things. We will use that quite a bit for the ice pattern as well. So essentially what you then need to do is to find some sort of noise that will have these like sharp transitions, right? Like it won't be just something like, I don't know, Berlin noise. Berlin is it's great for creating like, your, again, like your bulging, your little smooth transitions, your waves and stuff like that. But that's not what we want. We want something very sharp because we are talking about these like super jagged lines and all that. Again, later when I'll show you how I made the ice cracks and ice sort of flows, I use that a lot because that's exactly what you want to do, right? So we basically create a lot of these cracks, and then we blend them together. Then we distort them quite a bit, and then the most important part comes here, which is the flood fill, right? Again, flood fill is very basic. What it takes is some sort of black and white input, ideally, and it will try to find islands that are separated by black, right? So if I'm going to show you from, let's say, from the Voronoi cracks, right? Voronoi cracks here. I'm going to feed it into flood fill, and you can see what it does, right? Like it creates, I don't know, if you've ever used Blender, these are the colors you will get for UV mapping, right? Essentially, these are the directions of the UV. So what the flood fill node does, to simplify, is it sort of remaps a texture, or it identifies the islands and remaps a texture to it. It's actually one of the nodes you will need to use because it's always flood fill. That's like the analysis. And then you have the flood fill, for example, in this case could be mapper, and this will map an image onto every tile like that. So let's just take some simple noise. I don't know, whichever. Let's just use Berlin again. Let's put it in, right? And see, like this has now been mapped onto every single tile, right? And we can use this for a lot of things, again, because there are a lot of these like utility nodes that come after flood fill. You can create random colors, you can create random gradients, you can sort of round the corners on the original islands, you can select them, randomize them, all sorts of things. For this one, it's very simple. We just generate a lot of different color maps, and then we blend them together. And this is the basis for the color difference that we have here. Yeah. So that's the general principle. Then you just blend it together. You create a bit of roughness, a bit of normal, and just plug it into the final output. It's really not difficult since there really isn't much of a height information, right? Like we can just do this with normal information for the like subtle details, subtle scratches, subtle I don't know, indentations, stuff like that. But maybe dust, yeah. But that's it, right? We don't need much more. I actually don't know how rough or how reflective marble is in real life. Like again, I went to the library and I just like started thinking about it, but it was after I had made the material. So I made it quite shiny because who knows. I also think that marble in general should have some sort of subsurface scattering, so I also created a map for that. But it's always a bit tricky to create subsurface color for your material because that's actually quite like physics based, right? Like it's really dependent on your IOR, index of refraction, sorry, and it's kind of dependent on the physical properties of the material. So it's a bit of a guesswork. Also, like how much subsurface is there actually on something like this? This feels like maybe only the white parts or like the yellowish parts should have some sort of subsurface. But how much? A centimeter, 2 centimeters? How strong? I think that's something you would have to then test in your rendering engine. Let's say your your Blender or Houdini or whatever, whichever you are using. All right, so that's the basic. I'm now going to show you some of the details, but first I'm going to read the chat again. So if there are any questions, please just ask, so that I feel a little. It's strange to sit here and just like talk to myself. All right, anything, anyone? Yeah, to sum up, to summarize again, like you take cracks, Voronoi patterns, you distort them as you warp them a lot using different noises. You can also, I created another sort of cracks generator here for the large pattern. I blend them together, distort them again. Then I create a lot of like smaller variations of these cracks, and then I create the flat fills out of it all, and then we go into color creation and roughness creation, which is, by the way, like good, a very good workflow. I suppose you start with your like a height usually, right? But even now, like when we don't have height information, you're supposed to sort of analyze your materials, your reference into different elements. In this case, it's definitely the color, sort of the little shapes here, and the flat fills, and the cracks or veins, or what should we call them in marble. All right. Okay. Okay. Wow, we have 5 people here. Wow, I feel almost crowded, you know. Welcome, guys. All right, whatever. So let's go into the details. So the first step is let's generate 3 different cracks organic. Again, if you open the cracks organic, we can just do this and we can reset it. It will look something like this, which isn't bad, but looks much more like something, let's say some roots, yeah? Not exactly what you want, right? So I think the first, of course, it's a bit of an experimentation with the values every time. But essentially what I did, I wanted to have them much thinner, of course, right? To start with a thinner shape, less and also less noisy. I didn't want to have these like big shapes right here, at least not at that frequency, right? At that so many of them, right? And so it was just playing with a lot of the values. Um, Really, there isn't much to talk about in details, right? Like if it's not like every material is going to be different. You have to also every node in every software just works a little different. The values are a bit different. In a sense, like the most important setting here is the width, right? The width will make these patterns a little thinner or stronger actually, and so on and so on. Yeah, I also I think I also increased this smoothness a little bit, and also cracked the soda up. The soda basically like adds a bit of noise in how they are deformed, right? You can think about this like this is sort of a high level node. I think what goes on we can check or verify later, but essentially you take the Voronoi generator and you use the cracks output, which is this, right? You invert it, and you probably do what I did here, right? Like you just use a lot of slow blurs or warps to get this sort of pattern. They just, the people at InstaMAT, the developers, just sort of create this because this is something you will be using all the time. Yeah. All right. So cracks 1, and I'm just blending that using the maximum. I didn't use the full opacity here because I wanted to create a sort of an illusion of depth, right? And this is one way to do it. Basically, you create steps in your grayscale values, right? Again, this will come up for the ice. This will come up again for the ice. And then I created like one that's sort of like middle frequency, one that's a bit larger, and one that's a bit smaller. I again blended them together, and I just did that using a noise, just a large scale Berlin, and I use that to drive the opacity of the blending, basically to give it a bit more variation. And since since it's very important, I think, to sort of try to reuse as much as you can while working on a graph. Like this is a simple graph, but for example, the next one, the ice one, is really complicated and has a lot of nodes. And even though I have 3060, I still ran out of GPU quite quickly, GPU memory. And so it's better to reuse nodes with like as little of processing power as possible, right? So what I just did, I just used a safe transform. A safe transform will allow you to sort of deform your noise so that it doesn't break the tiling of the texture. And I just rotated it a little bit, and that's it, right? Like I at this level, no one will notice that it's the same noise, right? If this was like some sort of finishing touch, let's say your dust mask or something like that, then maybe use 2 3 different noises to create a lot of variation. But here, this is the first step. No one cares, right? Anyway, so I just created that so that we don't have the cracks don't just blend uniformly everywhere. All right. Now, I that was my first step, and I also wanted to create like uh, larger cracks, and I wanted to have some sort of control without manually placing them. And that's what this tile scatter is good for. Well, tile scatter, what does it do? It's simple. You feed it an image, and it scatters it randomly or uh, according to certain conditions, following certain conditions. It will scatter it uh, over the texture. So what we do, we just take a line or just a box, we really like squish it down. Then we use warp. There is really no need to use directional warp or anything more complex, just a simple warp. And just to create a bit of distortion, bend again, and essentially what we have now is a twig, right, or a branch. This is exactly how you would make procedural branches, by the way, right? Like you would add some more detailing, you would maybe distort it more, you would create different shapes to have different variations, but for this is perfectly fine. And then we use tile scatter to just, scatter it. And now, this is the first time I'm using the directional warp. I have this noise, it's called false warp. Uh, maybe this is a bit too heavy for what I'm trying to achieve, right? Like any noise like Berlin a little deformed, but what I wanted to do is to have these like little essentially what it does, like it deforms more where there is a difference in grayscale values from the intensity input. So here it's going to sort of like push the the values quite a bit, and whereas here, for example, it won't do much, right? I rotated it a little bit. Oops, I hate this. It's one of the things that bothers me. When you double click Save Transform, it will show you the transform instance of Save Transform node, but that's not what you want. I just wanted to see the preview. So by the way, you can see the preview by double clicking this little output socket. Yeah, it goes for everything. Like you can click on the input, you can click on the output, the background. In this case, there is no texture, so it's just going to give you a one by one a black square. Anyway, so yeah. By the way, if you want to zoom in, you can press F. F will sort of give you a full screen of the texture. Anyway, I rotated it a little bit to get a little bit more of a like interesting directionality, I suppose. I warped it. Yeah, what it does is this. I set the mode to average. You can use a lot of different stuff, right? Like for example, maximum will get the it's like lighten from Photoshop, right? Like it will give you the brightest values from both of the images. Uh, But anyway, I want it just average. It creates a bit of a, again, variation. And then I do the same again with another purlin. This time I didn't reuse this purlin from before because it was a bit bigger. I wanted a more high frequency deformation. And you can see what it does. It sort of creates these like, I don't know, flow lines or what have you. Then I sort of, again, oh my god, I hate this. This is one of the things I really don't like about InstaMAT. Anyway, then I safe transform it again to sort of give it the directionality I wanted. Also, it created a bit more interesting pattern in my eyes, so or to my eyes. So that's what it is. And we bring in another noise. This time it's marble noise. Like I had to use marble noise creating marble, right? That's the only way to go. So I create marble noise, and marble noise looks marbly, of course, but you can see it's very much CG. It probably uses some sort of rich noise, stuff like that. Um, so yeah, yeah, exactly, right? Like, uh, yeah, about subconscious or hey Dan, uh, yeah, like Marble. I think I really got inspired by what Jonathan Benanu did, right? But then just living my life, non-artist life, and just seeing this beautiful neoclassicist building, full of marble, full of wood, and like you can see that there are like these specular reflections everywhere. And of course, my brain starts working. Instead of focusing on what I was supposed to be reading there, I started thinking about my shading. Um, Anyhow, uh, that's a detour. Let's go back. Yes, marble noise. So marble noise, this is just this like heavily high frequency, rich noise. I don't know what else to call it. It doesn't matter really. But here I'm not using the noise itself. I'm using it to drive the subtle deformations on my previous warp, right? So if I just disable it, you will see that we have this before, and this is what it does. And it starts creating these like stony patterns. Of course, we are not done yet. It's very noisy. We couldn't really use it like that. It looks like, I don't know, alien electricity thing. By the way, InstaMAT has a noise that's called alien noise, which is again like some rich fractal beautiful noise. It really looks like you can almost imagine these like little eyes or something like that looking at you. Either way, I think I'm going to be using this one later. I'm not sure now. It's been a while. But anyway, so we keep doing the same thing. We have directional warp. This time I use this crystals noise. Um, Maybe you know something similar like this, or remember something similar like this from Substance Designer and Substance Painter. They have a different sort of default setting of crystals noise. It's very easy to get it though. You just blur it, really, right? Like it's not exactly the same, but you can set it up to look very similar. And all I wanted to do, I didn't want to have these like super sharp transitions. What it would do actually for the direction warp, if I turn off blur, you can see that it creates these weird like super sharp bends. We don't want that, of course, right? Like we just want to have it a bit more subtle, but it creates these like large like pushes in one direction, and that's exactly what we want, right? Like that's the kind of it's this this element right here, right? That's this. This is going to become this. All right. Yeah, and then I just like make it a bit more solid, right? Like before, we had a lot of like grayscale information, a lot of gradients. You don't want that. Like you want a solid shape and then break it down. In my opinion, that's the way to work. If you start with gradients and all that, you really lose a lot of control. So the way I think about it is like let's create a basic shape first, and then add the imperfections. Then add different like slopes and gradients and more distortions and noise over it. But like I come from more of a like 2D graphic design originally, and that's how you would work, right? Like you would create sort of an outline of your work, and then you would add details. I think working like this in texture creation is um, actually quite systematic, and it helps you retain control over what you're making. And one last directional warp. This time it's just this cloud smooth. It's a very high frequency noise with subtle transitions, right? Like you can see, we don't really have absolute blacks, and we don't really have absolute whites, or like 0 and 1 range. So it's like in the middle. And if I brought a histogram, you would see it, but I think you know what I mean. And so it creates just a little bit more of detail. It just distorts it a little more. It's subtle, but why not? Like the more you can add in details, then of course the material is going to look better, right? It's just about like choosing the right noise. I feel like the texturing in InstaMAT is really a lot about just having the right noise for the right occasion. All right, let me read chat again. Okay, so what do we have? This is on an average blend node which will blend multiple images correctly. You can change the double click behavior in Canvas. Yeah, I know that you can change the double click. That's how I did it, right? But some nodes, like for example, Safe Transform, and I had this with other nodes as well. I don't remember which one now. Will just take you to to the instance for some reason, right? Like you don't need this temporary graph session for the safe transform, because if you do the same for let's say for your directional warp, it doesn't take you into the node, right? So there is a discrepancy in how directional warp and safe transform work from the UI perspective. It's not a big thing, but I just keep forgetting that safe transform and what was it? I think crop or something like that does that. I don't know why. It's probably something to just fix. I think I actually wrote a feature request about it a while back. I don't remember. It's the nodes that have it's the nodes that are templates of other nodes that have this behavior. So you're telling me that safe transform is a template for what? For transform? I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, I find it kind of strange. Sorry. Maybe there is a reason I don't see, but from my little amateurish perspective, it's really annoying. Anyhow, so Dan, what did you mean by blind average? You can choose to might be interesting. Blind average. Oh, okay. I did not know this existed. Beautiful. So, oh, I see, I see. Yeah, okay. That's cool. Useful, useful. Will would have should have used that, especially when I was making the ice. I had a situation where this node would have been super useful. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right, Dan. Thanks, thanks. Another good tip, Well, that's why I do these streams, not to show you guys anything, but so that you guys can show something to me. It's all about selfish, okay? Anyway, the next step, right? And this is where it gets a bit more complicated, but not by much. First of all, I have to say I absolutely love the iterate node. It's a very simple node. It takes the input and it creates clones of it. It scatters clones of it with a little bit of blending, and you can set how opaque these clones are and how many of them are there, and it creates octaves, so you get like smaller and smaller ones. So it's a very easy way to create free detail, and then you can just blend it together or just distort it or do whatever you need, and it will just create a lot of small details out of an already pre-existing texture. I love it. I love it. It's such a quick way to work. It's sometimes it just really shows that you are using the same textures. You have to treat it a little bit, but it's great. Yeah. So iterate node. Great, great, great. Um, yeah, so as the name suggests, you basically take an input and you iterate on it. You create a few more instances of it and blend it together. Love it. That's one thing. So I take these. Oh my God, I did it again. I take these first two Crex organic that I made. Yeah, blend it together, and I essentially just create. Again, I did it again. Oh my God, I can't. I did it again. I did it again. Yes. Oops. I did it again. Yeah. I blend them together and then I iterate on them. Then we are warping them. Well, I had this stone noise, which is kind of like clouds, but a bit more sharp, and it creates, you can almost see it. Like this is a nice, lovely stone shape, right? Plus, it's in the name, right? Like you're creating marble, so you have to create marble noise. And if you're creating stone, you have to use stone noise. It makes sense, right? So essentially, that was me exploring different noises in InstaMAT. So I took that. I noticed that it doesn't have the full range again because it's probably based on some version of clouds or a Berlin noise or something like that. And so I used auto levels. What auto levels does, it takes the um, sort of the histogram and stretches it so that it matches 0 and 1, right? Like so it extends the range if it has been compressed. So I use that a lot. Again, it's another way to, of course, retain and regain information, especially useful for maintaining control over your height maps, for example. But it's also a tool that will allow you to sort of iterate to create different versions of your noises, right? Especially the procedural noises, they often come like not normalized, right? This is a normalization operation. So they are not normalized. You then can use it to your advantage. Another example would be your typical clouds, right? Let's just take clouds. You can see that it's not fully black and white, right? It's just somewhere in the middle of the histogram. Well, here you have it. That's the full range, which will create like stronger effects in your slow blurs and your directional warps and stuff like that, right? So this is exactly what I'm doing here, and I'm using this one noise to drive all of these transformations. Yeah. So I'm taking the first two cracks. I'm doing different iterates, different versions that I'm going to blend together afterwards. It already looks a little bit like, like marble. Then I introduce a lot of subtle detail using the clouds. Again, different direction, number, right? Directions, right? So basically you have the slow blur and it pushes the whites in one direction. The more directions you have, the more sort of different results, more varied it's going to be. Sorry, I have to drink a little bit. Anyway, so introducing detail using directional warp, 1, 2, and 3. And then I'm adding more variations. This time I decided to blend it to previous results and multiply it a little bit with this alien noise. It's just to introduce, subtle variations. I don't even know if we can like see it, right? Like it does something very subtle here. It just sort of hides these little ones in the background a little more. Um, I don't know. I was just doing this intuitively and very quickly actually. So I don't know. Like some of the decisions are probably like not optimal, but I liked it, right? Like so, what does it do on the material? Not much really, right? Like these like large scale changes in color. That's because of the flood fill seed, and so it doesn't really do that much. Like maybe you will see it in those like subtle little details. Like you would have to really be watching, looking at it from up close, but that's not what we are doing. Anyway, I don't know. I'm obsessive like that. I just need subtle details. Again, I iterate this result to get even more details. Right. So before we get to the flood fills, I do something very similar here. I take the large scale cracks or veins. I blur them a little bit to lose some of the noise that's around it. And and then I blend the blurred version with the previous version. So what it does, it sort of like killed a lot of the noise that was outside the white parts. It's just like I'm trying to target a certain part of the image, and this was like the easiest method at the time. Just instead of like trying to isolate it with, let's say, a histogram select. I'm pretty sure you know what histogram select is. It literally selects a part of the histogram. So let's just say I want only the brightest part within the range of like 1/10 of the histogram. This is what I would get, right? But this is very sharp. I'm losing detail here. It creates like a very smooth um, black and white mask, and so we lose a lot of the directional warping that we did before. So that wasn't the best way to create a mask or the new image. So what I did, I just sort of blurred the high frequency noise away and then blended it together. Okay, yeah, and I'm doing more of the same, right? This time I'm just using slow blur. As I said, directional warp is essentially like a series of slow blurs. What slow blur does, it takes some sort of height or intensity input plus the image, and it blurs it sort of following the gradients in the input image. Sorry, in the height input image, in the intensity input image. It will. I'm not probably not proficient enough to explain it right now. I just know what it does intuitively. I'm sure if you fiddle with it a little bit, you will know what it does, right? Like it's not difficult. Now, the result I'm getting here is this weird mess, right? Again, this will have to be processed quite a bit. So if I just hide it, this is the original image, right? This is what we had from the previous sort of low pass, if you will. And now I'm getting this. So again, it removes a lot of the sort of high frequency noise, which is what I wanted. And it also creates these pockets, right? And that's already reminiscent of what of the result that we want, right? Sometimes it's very thick. There is like a huge deposit of whatever stone there was. And sometimes it's very thin. And slow blur was the perfect node to do that. Again, I'm blending it with the previous result using maximum, so we only get the highest values there. I'm slow blurring it with itself. Now, this is a technique that you will use a lot, and it has a lot of different applications. Yes, you get an input image. Usually, oops, I didn't want to copy everything. You get an input image, and you slow blur it with itself. In this case, I'm using the maximum blending mode, so we get we get the whites from the previous one, the input version, and the blurred version. If you want to, so this is a great way to inflate your images, inflate your whites, essentially. If you want to shrink something, you can use minimum, right? Plus, yeah, you can use minimum. That's probably the most common use of this technique, where you like blend, slow blur an image with itself. I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit tired. Let me read chat as well. Nothing new. Of course, if there are any questions or anything, right? Like you go ahead and ask. Okay. Oh, hi, Mike Price. I didn't see you there. Hello there. All right. So I've treated my large-scale tracks. Now I'm blending the sort of non-inflated version with the inflated version using a soft light. Now, soft light must be one of my favorite blending modes. It's essentially a mix of, let's say, overlay and multiply. It's a bit more complicated than that, but what it does, it sort of it darkens the darks and it brings out the lights. Yeah. Oh, hello, Mike. Yeah. You know what? So am I. I've been doing that for, I don't know, a few months. It's as I said, like this is a learning experience for me, and I just like talking about it helps. And as you can see, like Dan here is of course an expert. You should of course check out his channel. He has many amazing tutorials both in InstaMAT and Substance Designer. So maybe he's the guy to go to, for advice. But here we just share our learning experiences, I suppose. Anyhow, so soft light, yeah. Uh, yes, as I said, like darken your darkens, lighten your lights, darken your darks, lighten your lights. Which the result is like a little bit of the inflated shapes stick around the white parts, you know, and that's what I wanted. That's really what I wanted. I wanted to get a bit more of a thickness sometimes, and I also wanted to get rid of these like grayscale and lower grayscale values, essentially the noise, right? Like I didn't want to have the cracks be little dots and little grains everywhere. All right, so that's that. And I'm also doing a third sort of processing part of the cracks. This time I'm doing again the same technique. I'm just taking this time the whole result. I think all three cracks blended together, all three cracks organic blended together, and I'm just using more and more of the same technique, directional warp. This time I use this liquid noise. Again, one of my favorite noises. It's high frequency, but at the same time you get these like large um, sort of lumps of white and grays. Um, you can like process this noise to get a lot of different variations of that look like, again, like liquid, of course, but also like leaves or your like little specks of dust. There are a lot of uses for this noise I found, and it's fairly light performance wise, so that's also very useful. Anyhow, um, yeah, so I'm taking the previous results and just warping them. What it does, because it's such a high frequency noise, it adds these little like rough edges to the stone, and that's where it sort of starts coming together. When you start adding these like low level details and it starts looking like stone or what have you, it's actually quite satisfying to me. I have to say that's why I like creating textures in InstaMAT. Anyway, what I do here, I only take sort of the brightest parts, right? It's a way to introduce variation. Here I take some of the I'm histogram selecting, so I'm selecting the lower part of the histogram. So the resulting mask is white, where it used to be fairly gray and black almost, right? And it sort of gives me blacks where it used to be white. So essentially this is like an invert operation of these. Like these two are related. I sort of try to isolate two different parts of the images with a bit of an overlap. I'm then adjusting it to get like a little bit of little sort of bring out some of the shapes and also solidify them in a sense. Again, I'm trying to get rid of different fine noise. I don't want it there. And then I'm using maximum to blend it in together again. So we still get like large shapes, but they are not as pronounced, right? We also get a bit more of like interesting detailing around here. Very useful. This is where like the organic feeling, the natural feeling comes, right? Like nothing is as uniform in nature. So you want to create these like little details, even though like you look at this noisy mass and you don't see it right away. It adds to the realism. At least I think so. I hope so. All right, I blur it a little bit to get rid of some of it. I didn't want too much of the detail quite yet. And then I do yet again I do another directional warp. To be honest, like this is open to interpretation. You can do, you don't have to blur it, right? Like if you're, it really depends on what you're going for. So now I'm bringing in a noise. This time again, very sharp, high frequency noise, clouds heavy. I think in Substance Designer is like one of those like clouds 3 or something like that. It's very similar. And I'm using that a couple of times to warp the images again. So we have this sort of large cracks map, and I just introduce subtle details along it, you know? So it creates these like almost stony feel. It's not there yet, but it's going to be there very, very quickly. Yeah. And I'm doing the same operation everywhere. Free detail. You know, it's not like you don't need much. And now this is the first time the image sort of comes together. So I have created a lot of different cracks masks, right? And I want to put them together. That's all this is, right? So we start with the large shapes. Again, you could do it the other way, right? Like you could start with the small ones and then work your way up to the large ones. I prefer to start with the large detail, the sort of large shapes, and then go into the minuscule ones. Um, Whatever, right? So yeah, I have this sort of black and white mask that I made. That's number one. Then I add or use maximum, right? Because I don't want to keep adding whites to whites. That's not what I want to do. I keep blending them together with maximum. Yeah, we add more, and this is where the super mega noisy image comes together. We add more. So now we have this almost like, I don't know, branch like. It's not bush like, I guess, bush like. Uh, Deep image, I suppose. You know, many different layers of grayscale values. It is noisy. I admit it might be too noisy, but it starts to look very organic, I suppose. Now, I also, especially for the small ones, I'm using two more noises just to introduce subtle variation in blending, like we did before. Um, like we did here with the Berlin noise. I just want to sort of break up the uniformity of the iterate noises we used from before, right? And so the last two ones, they have an opacity mask here. I see that I use screen. Doesn't matter, screen and a maximum in this case doesn't really make a difference, right? We just want to get the white values out of the images. So that's it. Now, this part, we will get to it later because this is sort of my preparation for coloring. But this is what I said before. It's the flood fills. The flood fills. Well, again, the flood fill will take an input, a black and white input. It will isolate parts of the image based on its sort of black contours. And we get this. This node, flood fill to color, it should, I think, I get why it's a mouthful already. Like flood fill to color, it's a long name. It should be flood fill to random color, right? What it does, it gives you a random color for each of those styles or each of those like islands that you isolated. And that's already looking like stone, right? I made a couple of these. And every time I isolated a different part of the sort of the detailing, right? So I start with the blend that doesn't have as much detail, and then I go with like more and more detail and more detail. It gives me essentially three different variations. So this is like the large shapes. You can see that we have like the grayscale values are covering like 1/5 of the image or something like that, right? And this is the middle and the super high frequency one. Now, what does this distance do? The distance node, it's basically your like dilation node. What it does, it looks, how do I explain this? Yeah, it it looks for the nearest white pixels, if that makes sense, and it sort of extends the values it has to that point of very. I am not explaining it very well. it's the same operation as with the Voronoi pattern, essentially. You distribute a lot of random points, right? You take the values, right? Like imagine a point in the middle, and then you just try to get the closest position, right? It's the same. It's really the same. What it allows me to do is to sort of extend these little islands so that they meet in the middle, yeah? So that there are no empty spaces. There are no blacks. The sort of the edges disappear, right? This is just to prevent it from creating a lot of artifacts because we are going to be blending the cracks over this, but they are not always 100% white. Yeah, I don't have a fully white masks. I have grayscale masks. So this one does it makes it so that these little colored shapes or something will be below the cracks as well, just to prevent some problems later. I did it like it was a preemptive move on my part. I didn't really have any problems, but I did it anyways. Um, you should probably find someone who can explain the distance node better. I just don't have the words right now. It's your typical dilation algorithm. Um, I don't know. Google it. Sorry, sorry guys. Yeah. So so this gave me three different maps that I can then use to create this color detail. I also created some more just by blending them with different modes. I played with like some less common nodes. For example, this exclusion node. I love it, especially I love it in like 2D design. It's lovely for I don't know your brutalism posters, right? But I'm not going to explain it right now. You can just play with the nodes. By the way, if you hold Control and scroll with your middle mouse, you can just scroll through the blending modes. Very useful, right? Because there are how many of them are there? Maybe 25. And like if you want to do that, you have to click, then like go down, find your exclusion, then set up the opacity. It's very slow, it's inefficient, right? So it's much better to just hold Control and scroll up and down, hovering over the mode selection. So that's one sexy trick, I suppose, in InstaMAT. Yeah, so I'm creating one variation here that's going to be a bit more like grayscale-ish. Then I have one that's really contrasty using the difference mode. Then I have another one that's also quite contrasty. This time it's the soft light mode. And another one that's super contrasty, add subtract. Yeah, basically whites become even whiter, darks become darker depending on the values. You know what? I'm not going to explain it. There are some tutorials online, for example, for Photoshop that will explain these modes quite well. Also, it's highly some of them are dependent on the order of foreground and background inputs. I have it set on to the letter X so that I can switch the inputs and outputs, right? Like you can see that add subtract really changes on depending on where the values are. But for example, if you have I don't know your multiply, it doesn't matter. Yeah, the operation is commutative. No, is it commutative? Is that the right word? Basically, you can execute it in any order. All right, I got distracted quite a bit. Is there anything in chat? Let me read. No? All right, I'm just gonna take a sip of my tea. All right. So these are the colored or color maps, so to speak. Yeah. And now we are going to do some coloring. So here I start with like reference 50% gray. It's again like allows me to retain control of like what I'm doing, right? And I'm subtracting some of the values from. Oh yeah, Dan. So Dan says that the input order for multiply matters if you use opacity as well with it. True. you're right, of course. Yeah, that's not. I was just blending here. 100% opacity. So it's just the pure math operation. um, but yes, of course, it matters. Everything matters. You know. All right. Anyway, so I'm subtracting some of the values to create these. Then I'm blending it with more values. This time with exclusion. It doesn't really matter. It's like, you know, if you get where you want, just it doesn't really matter which mode you're using, right? I mean, it's good to know what they do, and it's also good to know sort of have an intuition of like which node would be good for a certain situation. But for example, exclusion and difference nodes are very much dependent on the inputs, and they are less predictable. But I love them because you get some really crazy results that are otherwise quite difficult to do in just a few steps. So exclusion usually makes the image overall grayish, right? Difference creates, for example, outlines. It's a very good way of creating outlines without using like edge detect, right? But it's just a tip, I guess. Again, it's not the most predictable thing. So I was talking a lot about trying to retain control of your graph and make it predictable. This is not the way to go, but I was having fun, and that's it. Yeah. So again, adding even more detail, right? So we start with like the large shapes, we blend it with some more shapes here, even more shapes here, and these are pretty much copying the cracks map, right? So it's going to look as if the marble was sort of put together as it. I don't actually know how marble comes to be, but it has this like chipped look, right? Like it's almost like a mosaic where you put like different stones together, puzzle. Yeah. Anyway, and then I blended in a bit more of yellow. Um, you know, Jonathan Benanu, my inspiration for this, he had a bit more yellow there but I think it was a bit of a misinterpretation. Maybe his marble was actually yellowish in reality, but also he was making a post-apocalyptic game, and yellows are just good for that, you know. But I used yellows as well. In fact, the marble I found in the library that looked like this was very much blue. Yeah, so I would recommend going bluish. Uh, it's really subtle in any case, right? Like just a little bit of color. I'm using a mask for this. I just wanted to. I didn't want like the whole marble to go yellow, right? Like I just wanted some of the pieces to have a little bit of a tint, and so I used one of those masks I made before. You know, it's or actually I might have made the mask just for this purpose. It doesn't really matter. Just find a way to reuse what you had made before. All right, so that's like the base. And now we want to introduce the cracks, the veins, right? And I already established that I'm going to be using sort of a yellow monochromatic palette. So we input the sort of the base. I'm also sharpening the cracks or the veins. Uh, it brings out the detail, right? Again, like you don't have to do it. It's just going to be a bit more blurry, you know, depending on what you go for. Maybe if you go for some like more fluid marble, don't sharpen. Right. And this time I'm just blending it, and that's the whole point of making these masks, right? I made a lot of different cracks masks just to give me this, and I'm using that as a blend input. Sorry, blend opacity mask input for this. So basically, right now I'm filling in these little like vein spaces with a solid yellow color. Right? It doesn't really show as yellow in with this HDRI, but it is slightly yellow. So you could actually just throw it in, say, this is my white cracks, and be done with it. but you would lose some of the like control over the color of the cracks, for example, or the veins. And I keep doing more of the same. I'm not going to go through every single step. I'm just sort of like iterating, reiterating, masking, warping the previous masks to get color variation. Some of it is super subtle. You won't really even see it. There's nothing too crazy going on. I'm also using a little bit of like grain to give it like a little, more natural feel, um, more noises, more grain, stuff like that. Very basic. The basic, so the essential has already been made. And the last two things that remain to be made are the roughness. Since marble is quite uniform in that, right? I started with something that was very low roughness, and I thought maybe I should like add a little variation for the white parts and the rest of it. Like the veins would have maybe slightly rougher surface. When I saw the marble in the library, as I had mentioned, it doesn't really have that. It's all very uniform. But sometimes roughness can be like this like additional extra interest you can add to your material. So yeah, I created a bit more there. I also experimented with some other stuff that's not really that important. For example, I imported a texture that wasn't seamless. I made it seamless here in InstaMAT, and then I used it as a dust mask, and I used that for my normal channel, and I also use that for roughness. You won't really see it, right? Like it's just subtle. Uh, at this point, basically the material is done, right? There is nothing more. I also created a subsurface channel. Again, I'm not sure how to approach this in a meaningful way. In fact, like it should probably be very much a solid color kind of material, not not something as like contrasty and different, like in values like this. It should be very like low contrast, monochromatic stuff. But it actually kind of really depends on how your rendering engine will handle subsurface, right? For example, Blender will use the color information as the sort of the vectors for the scattering, right? Like it's going to be the three numbers you get, the RGB, are going to be then translated in somehow. I'm not quite sure how they do it into the color of the and the yeah, into the color of the rays that are going to be scattering through the material. So in that sense, like my color map might be okay because the black ones won't really get uh, scattered at all, but the yellow ones will. So be it. I don't know. I think a simple yellow color, slightly saturated yellow color would have been enough. Yeah. And the last two things I almost always do in my materials these days is to use this like material make, which is basically you bring all your channels together, and the material finalize. The material finalize will allow you to fine-tune some of the stuff. What I find the most sort of useful is this normal strength and the color sharpening. It's good practice to sharpen your color, your albedo channel at the end of the graph. That's the one thing that actually looks good when it's sharper. Like your height will not look good if it's too sharp. It will create artifacts. Your normal, it's the same problem, right? Your roughness, you actually want subtle differences, all over the material, but color better look sharp. So that's what I use quite a bit. This time only 5% because the material has already been sharpened multiple times throughout the workflow, so there is not much to sharpen, but still. And the normal strength, I pushed it down because I don't really have much normal information there. There is some dust and all that, but at this resolution, it doesn't really matter that much. So I turned it off. But you can just do that for your material as you like. And the easiest way to export your textures in InstaMAT is to right click on your material finalize, and here you can expose output parameters, right? Expose output parameters, and just choose which ones you want, and it will create these automatically, and then you can just go into the output, which one is that? Export image and data outputs, and just set it up there. I'm not too happy with this dialog. I find it quite confusing. For example, the relationship between these this export bit depth and this format setting is confusing. Uh, you can't choose the bit depth per channel, which is also something I would welcome. I understand that like these days hardware is pretty good, but still, like, do you actually need your roughness to be 16-bit? Yes, you need that for normals, you need that for height. It might be good for your base color, but do you actually need it in your ambient occlusion and roughness, right? And the difference can be quite significant in file size, again, depending on the material. But yeah, the export dialog, there are some tutorials on it on the InstaMAT official channel, so you can check it out there, or I'll make one eventually. So yeah, that actually took a lot longer than I expected. That's my marble material. Very simple, very quick. Uh, there is nothing too complicated. Anyone can make this in a couple of hours, I think. And it's a great way to start, I think, with InstaMAT and with like node creation, node material creation. Anyway, I guess that's it for today. I'm sorry if I misled you about the ice material, but I think that would take too long, and I don't want to stream for 3 hours. I might do another stream sometime during the week. Take a look at that material. It's really messy. This is such a super clean like graph, like everything is tidy, but actually deciphering what I did in the ice material will be a challenge on its own. So I think I'll leave that for next time. But yeah, if there are any more questions, any hateful comments, please hit me. I like it. At least communicate with me, please. That would be nice. Okay, if there are no questions, I'll just thank you for your, well, attention if you were here. Thanks for coming by. I think it's funny, we have a really strong, powerful software here. That's at least for the procedural material creation. It's I think it's better than Substance Designer, personally. It might lack a few features, something might be optimized, but we are looking at a software that's 1 year old, not even. And it's just a joy to work in it, I have to say. I wouldn't say the same for the painting suit. I think it's not there yet, but this like element graph, or as in the Substance Designer node graph, is just excellent, and you can do much more than just this, almost typical classical workflow from the Substance Designer. And yeah, I think the results tend to be good. So that's my marble material. Thank you, everyone. See you maybe on Wednesday. Maybe I could do it on Wednesday. Yeah, the second one, the ice material. Anyhow, take care. See you later. Bye.